I'm Nick Forster. You're listening to eTown. Abraham Alexander is going to be back later on to play some more music. And coming up, the one and only Bruce Coburn is here. So we're excited about that. Before we get to music, just thinking about Abraham's family's journey, leaving Nigeria, moving to Greece and finding that to be a real struggle, and then leaving again for the U.S. It's kind of a global issue, a global crisis based on some very fundamental human needs. Parents want their kids to be healthy and safe. That's kind of the main thing. And that takes money, and that means getting work. And that also is dependent on the fact that most places need to have a government and a society that respects the rule of law. And that isn't the case in a lot of countries. Our next guest is Kelsey Freeman. She wrote a book called No Option But North, and it's based on her year on a Fulbright Fellowship down in Mexico. And she spent a lot of time interviewing Central American migrants, and those stories kind of highlight the challenge of the failed state, essentially, when whole regions of Central America and Mexico basically were, power was ceded to the drug cartels and the gangs. And so there's a bunch of heartbreaking stories. But it's important to talk about it. So she's currently studying international policy at Stanford. She may be ditching class, actually, to be here today. Please help me welcome to eTown, Kelsey Freeman. Kelsey, welcome. Your book is not exactly a beach book. It's not exactly like, settle in and hang out. Powerful stories, great reporting. And I imagine that it was just an incredible opportunity for you to experience up close and personal what those lives and that particular part of the world feel like.
Yeah, that's very true. And I actually came to this work as I was focused much more on Indigenous rights across Latin America, but I was seeing the intersections of Indigenous rights and migration.
Yeah.
And seeing the ways in which people find themselves in impossible situations where they're making choices that aren't really choices at all.
Yeah. So, and how did all that start? The Indigenous rights was something that you were interested in when you were studying in college, or where did that begin?
Yeah, that began when I was in high school, actually, doing work on the Pine Ridge Reservation. So I've continued to focus on Indigenous rights, Native rights, migration, and then increasingly on climate change and the ways in which it's exacerbating those issues.
And climate change, of course, is producing a whole nother wave of migration and refugees who have to leave regions that are less inhabitable than they used to be.
Yeah, that's very true. But I came into this book project in particular from one particular moment where I was traveling in southern Mexico doing research for that undergraduate thesis when the man next to me on the bus asked a question. He had been deported from California years earlier, and he asked me, how is it that you can come to my country to study my people while I've been repeatedly denied for a visa to go back and visit my family in your country? And the question stuck with me. How could it not? Yeah. And it caused me to want to go back to Mexico and dig deeper into how is it that nationality and race and class all play a role in who gets to come to the U.S. through our authorized avenues and who has to take on this otherwise very perilous journey north.
Yeah, and you probably didn't understand the depth of that peril until you started hearing these stories, and you recognized that it was one after another, these hurdles that these sometimes, single parents or families, mothers with children, whatever they were, at each step of the way, there was some real danger.
Yeah, that's very true. I spent my evenings in the local migrant shelter. I was in a city called Celaya, Guanajuato in Mexico, which is in central Mexico, right along the path that many Central American migrants take north, because the freight train, what many migrants refer to as La Bestia, the beast, bisects the city.
Right.
So migrants were coming through, taking this freight train that was never meant for human passengers, and that's just one area of violence that they're navigating to get to the U.S. border, never mind cross it. Yeah. Paired with, this world where assault and kidnapping and rape and even death are absurdly common.
Yeah, and the train is dangerous too itself. Yeah, but I imagine if the train goes through your town, that means that some people are both guarding the train, or the officials are looking for migrants on the train, and also probably gangs are looking for people on the train, right?
Yeah, so Central American migrants, the minute they step into Mexico, they become exceedingly vulnerable. And there's a whole cast of characters that take advantage of that vulnerability, including Mexico's immigration patrol, including cartels that kind of will board these freight trains to kidnap migrants en masse or to rob them or assault them. Again, they're taking advantage of this vulnerability because everyone is looking the other way.
Or everyone's involved.
Yeah, that's true too. I think one of the things that really surprised me in speaking with people was just how willing folks were to share their stories with me, given they're navigating this world where they don't know who they can trust. That became particularly clear to me when accusations came out that the shelter that I was going to was tied up with organized crime itself.
Right.
So when even the supposed refuges aren't safe, migrants are truly navigating this world where they don't know who they can trust.
Not to be a plot spoiler, but that was a bit of a bummer at the end of your book to discover that this place that you were doing all these interviews turned out to be, in collusion with maybe sort of selling migrants to the cartels, which was just pretty horrible.
That was the allegation.
Heartbreaker. Yeah.
That was the allegation that came out that was told to me. And so I was 23 at that point, doing these interviews, was trying to think about, what do I do with this information? Do I go to the police? Do I go to the media? And that just kind of highlights the ways in which these key state entities are ensnared with violence. And so I went to the Fulbright Commission, I told them, and what did they do? They scooped me out of my host city. They plopped me down in a city an hour away that was much safer. And then I went home at the end of my grant. So it begs the question, who has the right to be safe? I certainly did, as I was scooped out of this place where I wasn't really in danger in the first place. But the migrants I interviewed decidedly do not.
Yeah. Those are stories that are not common. There's a lot of misconceptions, I think, about migration. And, we obviously believe in secure borders, and we believe that we need our elected officials to work on immigration policy and refugee policies. But it's hard to imagine having an impact. So what kind of feedback have you gotten? You shared these stories. They're tragic. They're heart-wrenching. They're real. What kind of response have you gotten to your book?
I think the key thing about the book is I've tried not to just share stories, but situate them in the policies and practices that render them possible in the first place. So I think I've had a lot of really moving conversations with folks who have read the book. And if anything, it's made me believe wholeheartedly in the power of stories that are true and that talk about violence in this authentic way, but that are ultimately about people's dignity as human beings. And I believe in the power of those stories to inspire political action and to help us make sense of the political world in which we're living in.
Mm-hmm. And in that light, are you sending copies to your congressional delegation and others?
I have been, I sent one copy to my senator, which was great.
Yeah.
And then, I think one of the things being in graduate school that I've been thinking about is how do I leverage this network that I'm in to kind of connect policy with the people who are affected by those policies. That's my overall goal in all the work I do, is bridging policies with the on-the-ground effect that it has.
Yeah. So as you glimpse into the future, is there a pathway towards safe passage for some of these families? Or more to the point, I think it's really about trying to heal some of these failed states and make it safe to live in El Salvador. Make it safe to live in Guatemala. Make it safe to raise your family in some of these places so that it isn't, as your book is titled, No Option But North.
Truly, I think the goal is to help prioritize people's individual agency in this process and communities' agency. I've been doing more and more research about climate change and the way in which it's exacerbating migration. And one of the key takeaways there is I am drawn to solutions where people have the choice, where if they need to migrate, they have avenues to do so in an orderly fashion where they're not risking their lives and navigating this web of violence. Or if they want to stay in place, if they want to adapt to the effects of climate change, they have the resources and support to make that happen. So I know that sounds idealistic in the current political world we're in, but I think when I look around at my generation and folks kind of continuing to focus on this issue, who really care about climate change, who understand that it has profound human rights implications and who understand that in more than an abstract way, I think long-term we will move towards an immigration system that prioritizes humanity in the process.
Yeah, and I think for all the tragedy and all the disappointment and all the challenges, even Abraham Alexander's story has some happy ending, resolution, an opportunity for this Nigerian family to find their way to the States, and it can end well.
Yeah, and some stories do have happy endings. I mean, I have one particular story from my book does have a happy ending, where I interviewed Roberto, this migrant from El Salvador who was fleeing gang violence, who got to the U.S. and spent a year in a detention center, even though he was applying for political asylum. Later, he got involved with an organization who could argue his case for him. He received political asylum, and then 2 months ago, he called me up, and he said, "Kelsey, I have something to tell you." And I got all worried. I was like, "What happened? Is he okay?" And he said, "I just got my green card in the mail." And that was truly meaningful to me. He's someone I've stayed in touch with since I met him years ago. And for him to know that he has that stability, that the ground isn't moving underneath his feet in this moment is huge.
Yeah, well, I can say that it was, it's one story out of many that has a happy ending, because most of them don't. But it doesn't mean that we shouldn't know them, we shouldn't read about them, we shouldn't learn about them. So thanks for sharing those stories. And thanks for being here.
Thank you very much for having me.
The book is called No Option But North, thanks to Kelsey Freeman, author and student. Good job, Kelsey.
Thank you.
Thank you.